ChatGPT said. Ibrahim Traoré was not born into privilege. He grew up in a small village on the dusty plains of northern Burkina Faso, where life was hard and hope was often thin. As a boy, he saw his parents work long hours in the fields, only to sell their millet at prices set by traders from faraway cities. He watched older men struggle under the burden of debts and dreamed of a day when his country would stand tall and free. Even as a child, he felt a quiet fire in his chest, wished to help his people seize their own destiny. When Traoré joined the army, he learned discipline and strategy. He studied maps late into the night and rose before dawn to train his fellow soldiers. He listened closely to the older officers, absorbing lessons about leadership and loyalty. In the barracks, he made friends with young men who had also known hunger and poverty. They spoke of frustration with distant governments and foreign companies that seemed to take Burkina's gold and leave little but envy behind. Over time, Traoré rose to the rank of captain. He earned respect by treating every soldier with fairness, whether that soldier came from a wealthy family or a poor village. His calm voice in moments of tension became a guide for others. When disputes flared between local communities and mining groups, Traoré would step in and ask questions until he understood both sides. He was never cruel or harsh, he believed. That simple, honest talk could solve many problems. Meanwhile, news of his fair treatment spread beyond the army. People started to call him a man of the people. Village elders whispered his name when they spoke of leaders who cared. Traders in Ouagadougou mentioned him quietly when they wondered which officers might really change the country. Even in the capital, students protested at their university gates, demanding that gold mining profits benefit local schools and hospitals. Traoré watched these protests on television and felt the same hope that he had carried since childhood. Then came a time of great unrest. The previous government, led by a general who once promised reform, had proved unable to ease poverty or curb corruption. Demonstrations filled the streets. Soldiers and citizens sometimes clashed at roadblocks. In the heart of Ouagadougou, the presidential palace stood, surrounded by crowds chanting for change. Traoré kept his men calm and kept his own heart steady. He knew that sudden brutal force could lead only to more pain. He chose instead to speak with protest leaders, to ask them what they truly wanted. Schools that stayed open, clinics that stayed stocked with medicine, farmers who earned fair prices. Word reached him that the president was planning a harsh crackdown. Traoré felt a surge of anger not at the soldiers under his command, but at a system that cared more for outside interests than for its own people. He thought of the child in his village who could not read because the school roof had caved in. He thought of his mother, who had once sold millet to pay for medicine. He decided that he could no longer stand by. In the quiet hours before dawn, Traoré and a small group of trusted officers met in a dimly lit room. They spoke in low voices, not of personal power, but of serving the nation. They agreed that if they could take control without bloodshed, they would. If they could guide the country to fairer days, they would. There was no love of violence in their heart, only a fierce desire to reshape the future. When the coup happened, it was surprisingly peaceful. Patrols moved to secure key buildings, and loyal troops surrendered without resistance. In the intervening hours, Traoré walked through the streets, unarmed, greeting citizens who stared in disbelief. People invited him to their homes, offering water and simple meals. They bowed their heads not in fear, but in relief. A barber in a tiny shop asked for a quick trim, and after cutting Traoré's hair, shook his hand with tears in his eyes. A teacher gave him a dusty notebook and wrote on its cover for our new captain. Every small act reminded Traoré why he had taken this risk. Once in power, Traoré spoke to the nation on radio and television. He did not boast or threaten. He thanked the people for entrusting him and promised to work day and night to improve their lives. He used simple words: we will stand together, we will build schools, we'll care for our sick, and we will claim what belongs to us. People listened with hope, but some wondered how these words would match action. Behind the scenes, Traoré assembled a group of advisors, economists who understood Burkina's budget, engineers who had studied mining, and legal experts who knew international trade rules. He also listened to small-scale gold miners in remote villages. He asked them where they felt most cheated. Was it the price they received, the taxes they paid, or the cost they faced for tools? He took notes as these miners spoke of hidden fees and unfair taxes that left them with almost nothing for their hard work. One evening, Traoré called an emergency meeting in his office at the presidential palace. Maps of mining zones covered. The table showed how much gold left the country each month without being processed here. Tapped a finger and said, "We are giving away our future." He proposed building a gold refinery so that raw gold could be turned into pure ingots inside Burkina Faso. He believed this step could multiply profits, create jobs, and keep more money in local towns and cities. His advisors worried about the cost. They spoke of high construction expenses and the need for foreign investment. They noted that Western governments might react badly. One cautious economist warned, "They will call us unstable." They will. Threaten sanctions, a legal expert added. "We must be careful with international trade agreements. We could face lawsuits." But Traoré shook his head, said, "We have lived under their rules for too long. It is time we set our own. We owe it to our children and their children." In the following days, Traoré ordered feasibility studies to begin. He instructed a team to inspect abandoned industrial sites left from decades past. They found a large area on the city's outskirts, once a textile mill, now overgrown with weeds. Its sturdy walls and clear roads gave new hope. Engineers sketched plans to install smelting furnaces, storage warehouses, and testing labs. Local workers, some of whom had never touched metal, walked the halls with excitement, dreaming of new skills and steady wages. Meanwhile, Traoré spoke directly to the nation again, told farmers, miners, and traders how the refinery would help them. He used simple examples. If you sell 1 gram of gold, soon you will get full payment in our currency without waiting for ships or foreign banks. You can buy food, pay school fees, and save for the future. His calm voice carried sincerity. Some people cried tears of joy. Others whispered, "Perhaps this time things will change." Not everyone shared the same excitement. Merchants who depended on exporting raw gold worried about their businesses. Foreign companies sent letters reminding Burkina Faso of existing contracts and warning of legal battles. Western embassies sent cautious cables, asking for more information. But Traoré remained steady. He said to his inner circle, "We must act now. Delay means more wealth flows out of our hands." By the end of the first month, the feasibility team submitted a detailed report. It showed that with careful planning and local labor, the refinery could break even in 5 years. It promised to create jobs and add value to every ounce of gold produced here. Traoré read the report late at night, surrounded by silence. He closed his eyes and imagined the sound of machinery humming, the glow of molten gold, and miners' proud faces as they watched their own country forge its future. As dawn broke, he signed the order to move forward. He wrote his name with determination, knowing that this decision would echo far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. With that signature, the young captain began to turn hope into reality and set the stage for changes that would soon rattle capitals halfway around the world. Ibrahim Traoré did not wait for perfect conditions. Once he decided to build a gold refinery, he moved quickly. Early one morning, he set out from the presidential palace in a gray SUV, flanked by a small convoy of military vehicles. The sun was just rising above the dusty horizon, painting the sky pink and gold. Traoré watched the passing villages, where children ran barefoot to school and women carried water in bright clay pots. He felt a surge of hope as he thought of the jobs and skills this project could bring. A few hours later, the convoy reached the old textile mill on Ouagadougou's edge. The site was huge, with tall brick walls stained by years of rain and sun. Vines crept over broken windows and piles of rubble lay where machines once stood. But Traoré's eyes saw promise, not ruin. He stepped onto the cracked concrete floor and breathed deeply. Engineers and surveyors stood waiting in hard hats and dusty boots. Among them was Adama, a young civil engineer who had studied abroad and returned eager to help his country. Captain Adama said, bowing his head respectfully. "We have marked out the areas for the furnaces, storage, and offices. The ground is firm, but we must clear debris and reinforce the old foundation. Traoré nodded. Good. Start today. His voice was calm but firm. Workers gathered at his command, local men and women who had come from nearby towns and villages. Some had never seen a construction project this large. They stared at the plans spread on tables under a makeshift tent. Traoré walked among them, greeting each person by name if he could. He paused by a group of young men carrying steel beams. "You look tired," he said to one of them. "Take a short break. Drink some water." They smiled in surprise. Leaders rarely showed concern for laborers' comfort, but Traoré believed respect mattered. The workers sat in the shade, sipping water from plastic bottles. A young woman named Amina, who had worked as a seamstress before, spoke up. "Sir, I have no experience with metalwork," she said softly. "Can I help in other ways?" Traoré smiled. "You can learn. We will train you. You will be an inspector checking the welds and the metal sheets. We need sharp eyes." Amina looked nervous but determined. Others nearby nodded. The project was not just about metal and concrete. It was about learning and growth. Meanwhile, Adama and his team carried out soil tests. They drilled small holes and took samples. They measured moisture levels and rock density every few hours. They radioed updates to Traoré's office. The initial reports were good. The ground could bear heavy weight, but rainwater drainage would need careful planning. Burkina's rainy season came soon, and flooding could halt work. Traoré called his advisor for agriculture and infrastructure, a man named Moussa. They met in a temporary office, a refurbished shipping container near the site. Moussa spread a map on a folding table. "If we channel the runoff toward the old canal and build small trenches," he said, "we can protect the foundations. It will add 2 weeks to the schedule." Traoré leaned forward. "Do it. We cannot lose time to water." Outside, bulldozers began pushing aside piles of brick and steel. Dust rose in clouds that shimmered in the late morning sun. Children from a nearby neighborhood gathered at the fence, watching with wide eyes. A guard opened a gate and invited them in. For a moment, the dusty site became a classroom. Engineers showed the children how machines dug earth. Surveyors explained the meaning of maps. The kids touched the blueprints and asked questions. Traoré watched from a distance. He thought of his own childhood and the lack of such chances. By midday, a military engineer unit arrived with heavy tools. These soldiers had training in building bridges and roads. Their leader, Lieutenant Salif, reported to Traoré. "Sir, we can help clear and lay the main road to this site. It will ease transport of materials and encourage traders." Traoré nodded again. "Use the graders and rollers. I want a smooth road by the end of the week." Within hours, a line of trucks and tractors rumbled to life. They stretched the old dirt track into a firm pathway. Villagers waved as the machines passed. Even offered cassava and bread to the soldiers during breaks, a sign of community support. At the same time, Traoré held nightly meetings at the palace. He invited the economy minister, the head of the mining authority, and the finance director. They gathered around a long wooden table, papers scattered beneath bright lights. "We must secure funding," the finance director said. "Our budget covers only half the cost. We need loans or investors." Traoré frowned. "I refuse to let Western banks dictate terms. We will use our reserves and partner with friendly nations." The economy minister looked uneasy. "Which nations, sir? Many are hesitant after our recent unrest." Traoré tapped his pen. "We'll talk to China and India. They have invested in Africa before. I will meet their envoys next week." Silence fell as everyone considered the risks. Burkina had debt already. But Traoré believed that keeping control of the project was worth the gamble. Back at the refinery site, the first foundations were poured. Workers mixed concrete by hand in wheelbarrows and shovels. They smoothed the wet surface with wooden boards, singing softly as they labored. An older man, with silver hair and calloused hands, led the chant. He had been a miner in the 1970s when gold exports began. He paused and wiped sweat from his brow. "This reminds me of old days," he said to a young helper. "We dug the shafts, and we watched gold leave our land. Now we build a place to keep it." The young helper nodded, pride shining in her eyes. Across the site, others felt the same sense of purpose. In Ouagadougou, radio stations buzzed with talk of the refinery. Some callers praised Traoré's vision. Others worried about costs and delays. Newspapers printed sketches of the mill's new layout and quoted market experts on gold prices. Western financial news mentioned the project. 2. Warning investors of state interference and market uncertainty. Traoré heard these warnings but did not flinch. One afternoon, he visited the National University, spoke to students in a crowded lecture hall, showing slides of the refinery plans. The students listened attentively. After his talk, one student asked, "Sir, how will we ensure this project serves the people and not just the military or the elite?" Traoré smiled. "We will form a citizens' oversight committee. Farmers, miners, teachers, and doctors will join. They will inspect progress monthly and report publicly." The students broke into applause. Traoré believed in transparency, even when others preferred secrecy. As weeks passed, steel beams rose from the concrete bases. The framework of the first furnace chamber took shape. Skilled welders, some trained by military engineers, worked in pairs. Sparks flew, and the clang of hammer on metal echoed across the site. Supervisors checked every joint. Amina, now a trained inspector, tapped on a metal plate and listened. For imperfections, she called out adjustments. Traoré visited often, sometimes arriving unannounced. He crouched beside her, learning the basics of quality control. One evening, the site manager found Traoré staring at the half-built structure. "Captain, I did not expect you here so late," she said. Traoré looked at the steel skeleton against the dark sky. "I wanted to see it with my own eyes." "Tomorrow, we will light the first test furnace." She raised an eyebrow. "Tomorrow? That is early." He nodded. "We need to test the designs. If we wait too long, mistakes cost months." She smiled. "Yes, sir. I will prepare." At dawn, the test. Furnace roared to life. Flames glowed orange and white. Workers held their breath as molten metal gathered in the crucible. The refinery's first batch of refined gold was only a small test sample, a few grams to check purity. Yet when the lab announced a result of 99.9% purity, cheers erupted across the site. Men and women hugged. Some wept quietly. Had made history. Traoré stood aside, arms folded, a small smile on his face. He remembered the child selling millet for medicine, remembered the families waiting for fair prices. Now, with each step, they moved closer to self-reliance. Across Western capitals, trade analysts revised their forecasts. Desk raised risk levels. Paris's mining committees debated how to respond. But for the people working in Burkina Faso, none of that mattered at the moment. They had built something new with their own hands, and, in doing so, they had started to reshape their nation's destiny. ChatGPT said, "The morning of the grand opening arrived with a clear sky and warm lights spreading over Ouagadougou. Crowds gathered along the road to the refinery site, their faces bright with hope and curiosity. Farmers in leafy green outfits, traders in colorful robes, students in neat uniforms, and even small children holding balloons pressed close to the fence. A sense of excitement filled the air, as if everyone knew they were part of something new and important. Ibrahim Traoré stepped from his vehicle dressed in plain clothes, a simple shirt and trousers, blending with the people instead of standing. Above them, he waved gently, smiling as mothers lifted their babies for a better view. Fathers raised their children on their shoulders. He walked slowly toward the entrance, greeting everyone with respect. "Thank you for coming," he said softly, to an elderly woman leaning on a wooden cane. "Today is for all of us." Inside the refinery grounds, workers in clean white helmets and bright safety vests moved busily. They adjusted final details, straightened signs, and tested microphones on the stage. A band of soldiers in crisp uniforms stood by, ready to play the national anthem. Neat rows of chairs faced the main platform with flags fluttering gently overhead. The flag of Burkina Faso, bright red and green with a yellow star, waved proudly. Beside flags of friendly partner nations, when the official hour arrived, Traoré stepped onto the stage. A silence fell over the crowd. He took a deep breath, remembering the long nights of planning and the early mornings on the construction site. He remembered the soil tests, the pouring of foundations, the tests of the first furnace. He thought of the workers singing as they mixed concrete and the children who touched the blueprints with wonder. All of that had led to this moment. He spoke into the microphone in a clear, calm voice that carried through the open space. "My fellow citizens," he said, "today we open not just a building of steel and stone, but a door to our future. For too long, our gold left our land before we could share its full value. Today, we keep it here. We refine it here. We build. Our strength here," the crowd cheered, some stamping their feet, others raising their voices in joyful calls. Traoré paused, letting their energy fill him. Then he invited a group of local miners to join him at the ribbon. These were men and women who had dug for gold in small pits and riverbeds, often selling their finds for barely enough to feed their families. They wore simple clothes dusted with earth, but on this day they stood tall. Together they held a long red ribbon stretched across the main gate. Traoré cut it with large scissors, and the ribbon fluttered to the ground. Instantly, the workers inside the gate lifted heavy metal doors with a smooth motion. A warm glow of light spilled out from inside the main hall. The crowd gasped and cheered again. The refinery was open. Traoré led the way, walking through gleaming corridors lined with spotless glass windows. He pointed out the testing labs, where technicians in white coats checked the quality of gold samples. He showed the storage rooms where ingots would rest under watchful eyes before being sent to banks or markets. In the center, the great furnace stood silent but ready, a powerful machine built to transform raw or into pure gold. He turned to the miners beside him. "This is your refinery," he said. "You helped make it happen. You will share in its benefits." Outside, food stalls had been set up for a celebration. Women from nearby villages served plates of jollof rice, grilled fish, fresh fruit, and sweet tea in small clay mugs. Children played games under shade trees, and storytellers sat on mats, telling tales of great kingdoms and brave heroes. Musicians, with drums and stringed instruments, formed a circle, inviting everyone to dance. Even Traoré tapped his foot to the rhythm as he walked through the crowd. Meanwhile, foreign envoys and diplomats stood in a separate tent, their expressions mixed. Some wore suits and ties, others national dress. They whispered among themselves, watching the ceremony unfold. A French ambassador furrowed his brow, noting the impassioned speeches. A British trade official tapped notes on his tablet, listing questions about export controls. An envoy from India nodded thoughtfully when Traoré spoke of partnering on technology and training. Traoré greeted them politely, but he remained focused on his own people. As the sun climbed higher, Traoré returned to the stage for the formal press conference. Journalists from local radio stations raised microphones, while camera crews adjusted their lenses. He answered questions in simple language, ensuring that every listener could understand. "Our goal is to refine at least 1 ton of gold each month," he said. "We will sell it at fair prices and invest the money in schools, hospitals, and roads." A reporter asked, "How will you guard against corruption?" Traoré looked directly at her. "We will publish our accounts every quarter. A citizens' committee will audit them. Everyone will know where the money goes." His promise drew applause from the crowd. Later, walking among the drums and dancers, Traoré paused to talk with a young teacher named Salma. She had taught at a rural school with a missing roof and no textbooks. Now, the first funds from the refinery would rebuild her school. She placed her hand on his arm and whispered, "Thank you. You have given our children hope." He smiled, remembering his own school days and the broken blackboards he faced. "We will do more," he said. "This is only the beginning." As the day turned to afternoon, the first batch of refined gold was presented. A small, gleaming ingot lay on a red velvet cushion on the stage. Its surface shone like liquid sunshine. A Traoré lifted it, holding it high for all to see. The crowd erupted in cheers so loud that the metal panels of the refinery trembled slightly. Musicians launched into an energetic song, and even the diplomats in their tent could not resist tapping their feet. That evening, leaders from neighboring countries arrived to inspect the refinery by lamplight. They toured the halls, listened to engineers explain the smelting process, and tasted the sweet tea offered by local hosts. One minister from Ghana shook Traoré's hand and said, "You have shown courage. This will change the region." Traoré nodded. He felt proud but cautious. He knew challenges lay ahead, keeping the refinery safe, maintaining quality, and ensuring fair distribution of profits. But on this day, he allowed himself to celebrate. Under the glow of floodlights, workers filed out and gathered near the entrance. Traoré joined them quietly. They stood together, looking at the great metal doors that now opened daily for their nation's gold. A sense of unity settled over the group. Soldiers stationed guard nearby lowered their rifles and relaxed. They saw the meaning of this place more clearly now. It was not just a building, but a promise. Late that night, as the celebrations wound down, Traoré walked alone through an empty corridor. The air smelled faintly of metal and earth. Past the testing lab, where a lone technician cleaned her instruments. She looked up and nodded. He nodded back. In his mind, he replayed the day's events, the ribbon falling, the first furnace lighting, the cheers echoing in every corner. He thought of the families who would eat better, of children who would learn in new classrooms, of workers earning a steady wage. At the end of the hallway, he paused at a window overlooking the site. He could see the dark shape of the mill against the starry sky. He wondered how many governments were now watching, how many markets would shift in response to this bold move. He thought of Western capitals, uneasy at losing control of gold supply chains. He thought of the morning's promise to keep accounts open, to form an oversight committee. He wondered if he could sustain this honesty in the face of pressure. Then he felt a gentle breeze and turned to walk back to his office. Tomorrow, the refinery would begin real work processing tons of gold and sending its value back into Burkina Faso's economy. The real test would begin. Tonight he carried a lightness in his heart, knowing that what had seemed impossible just months ago now stood bright and alive. He remembered the child in his village who once sold millet to pay for medicine. He thought of his own mother and the dream she held for her son. He whispered to the night, "We did it." And with that simple truth, he stepped into the future. He had forged with his own hands and the hands of his people. 2-2. Foreign governments watched the news of Burkina Faso's new gold refinery with growing concern. In capitals such as Washington, Paris, and London, diplomats discussed what Traoré's move meant for global markets and existing mining contracts. At Western embassies and Ouagadougou, envoys whispered in tinted windows about possible responses. They wondered if they should sanction Burkina Faso or simply warn companies that the new state-run refinery might break trade rules. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré rose before dawn and walked through empty streets toward his office. He thought of the letters he had received overnight. Some were polite notes from friendly nations offering support and technical advice. Others carried sharper tones, reminders of existing agreements, veiled threats of legal action, and concerns about market stability. But Traoré remained calm. He knew that change often caused fear in those who held power before. As sunlight washed over the city, Traoré convened his council of ministers in the palace's meeting room. The economy minister reported first. "Our gold output has already drawn attention," she said. International gold prices dipped briefly last night as traders reacted to uncertainty. "Some banks have frozen transfers from our central bank account." She tapped a chart showing price fluctuations. "If this continues, it could raise fuel and food costs here." The finance director, a serious man named Issa, added, "Our reserves can cover short-term shocks, but we must act carefully. We might set aside a stabilization fund to cushion sudden market swings." He looked at Traoré for approval. Traoré listened and pressed his fingers together. "We will protect our people," he said simply. "Set up the stabilization fund, use part of our refinery profits, and reassure traders that we will sell our gold at fair rates." Next, the foreign affairs minister spoke. "Western capitals demand talks. They say your actions threaten free trade." She paused, glancing at him. "They may impose targeted sanctions on individual leaders. We must prepare responses," Traoré nodded. Invite them to Ouagadougou. Let them see our work firsthand. We will show transparency. We will open our books. He believed that inviting scrutiny would weaken criticism. Later that morning, Traoré held a press briefing outside the refinery. Journalists from around the region gathered, eager for updates. A reporter from a European news agency asked, "General, are you worried about sanctions? Will you back down?" Traoré shook his head. "We will not back down. We open this refinery. For our people's benefit, if outsiders are afraid, let them be afraid of us standing for ourselves." His calm confidence carried through radio waves and news clips broadcast across Africa and beyond. Inside the refinery compound, workers carried on with routine tasks. They wore bright helmets and checked machines under the watchful eye of supervisors. The first full month of production began, and modest amounts of gold ingots rolled off the line. Trucks loaded these ingots and drove to the central bank under military escort. Inside the bank vault, the metal bars gleamed in neat rows. Bank officials counted each ingot. They recorded weights and purity levels, then stamped them with Burkina Faso's seal. The process was open. Observers watched and took notes. These records would become part of the public audit Traoré had promised at the central market. Small traders and jewelry makers saw the news on their phones. They welcomed the development, hoping for more local supply of gold at stable prices. A goldsmith named Yakuba grinned as he held a small ingot. "Now I can buy gold here without waiting for imports," he told his assistant. "Prices may drop a bit, and I can make rings and necklaces in my workshop." Meanwhile, foreign mining companies recalculated their plans. They had traditionally mined raw gold in Burkina Faso and exported it at a small profit. And now they faced extra steps: selling or to the state refinery at a set price, losing the chance to refine it themselves. Some companies threatened to withdraw or to slow operations, citing uncertain regulations and government overreach. In response, Traoré met with the head of the National Mining Authority. "We respect private companies," he said, "but they must follow our rules. They can still operate mines, but refining will happen here. If they refuse, we will invite new partners." He looked the authority official in the eye. "Our goal is not to punish anyone. It is to share our wealth." That evening, Traoré visited a neighborhood near the refinery. Streetlights glowed and families sat outside their doors. He walked along the main road, greeting shopkeepers. A taxi driver named Osman stopped his car and got out. "General," he said, "fuel prices went up this week. Is this connected to gold market shifts?" Traoré nodded gravely. "Yes. Partly," he explained, "but we are working on it. We will use our stabilization fund to buy fuel reserves and keep prices steady for a time." Osman smiled with relief. "Thank you, sir. We trust you." Word of Traoré's promise spread quickly. In village cafes and roadside tea shops, people sipped sweet mint tea and debated the refinery's impact. Some worried about rising costs. Others felt proud that their leader dared to challenge powerful nations. A teacher in a remote village told her students about the stabilization fund, showing them a news clip. The children listened, eyes wide, imagining what it would be like to have steady school supplies. In Western capitals, financial analysts updated their reports. A London gold desk wrote, "Burkina Faso, refinery, to put downward pressure on raw or exports. Monitor for further market moves." A Paris think tank published a short paper, "Resource Nationalism in West Africa, Potential Risks and Opportunities." Western diplomats drafted new strategies, weighing the cost of sanctions against the risk of pushing Burkina closer to non-Western partners. Meanwhile, Ouagadougou Traoré prepared for a new challenge. He would host a delegation from India and China, nations known for refinery technology and investment in Africa. They arrived in convoys of sleek cars, their representatives dressed in smart suits. Traoré welcomed them at the palace courtyard, where guards saluted. In the meeting room, tables brimmed with tea and fruit. The envoys praised the refinery and offered technical help, more efficient furnaces. Training programs for technicians, improved safety measures. Traoré listened carefully, asking detailed questions. He wanted to ensure that any support came without hidden strings. He made it clear that all decisions would go through Burkina's own institutions and the Citizens' Committee. The Chinese envoy spoke of long-term loans, low interest, and infrastructure projects. The Indian envoy offered joint ventures and technology transfer. Traoré weighed both offers. He knew that accepting help could come with expectations, yet he also recognized the need for expertise to maintain high production and safety standards. At the end of the day, Traoré stood outside the palace and watched the sun set behind the hills. He thought of his people, the farmers, the miners, the shopkeepers, who depended on him to safeguard their future. He thought of foreign capitals that wanted to shape his decisions. He felt the heavy weight of responsibility, but he also felt the warmth of progress, a refinery alive with machines, a nation learning self-reliance, hearts lifted by a promise kept. Behind him, the palace lights glowed softly. Tomorrow, he would return to the refinery, check its daily reports, and meet with the Citizens' Committee. They would review the accounts and speak openly. He would answer questions honestly and plan for the next stage, expanding capacity and building schools with refinery funds. As night deepened, traders closed their shutters and streets emptied. Traoré walked back through quiet avenues, thinking of the challenges ahead. He whispered to himself, "We must stay strong and true." And under the blanket of stars, he prepared for the battles to come against doubt, against pressure, and against old fears, knowing that his people looked to him to steer the country toward a brighter dawn. The refinery had been running for several months now. Its presence reshaped daily life in Burkina Faso, in small towns and big cities alike. People spoke excitedly of new possibilities. Shopkeepers who once struggled to keep their shelves full now planned to expand. Parents dreamed of better schools. Even the dusty roads outside the refinery site showed signs of repair, with new gravel laid down and streetlights installed. Traoré watched these changes with quiet satisfaction. Yet he knew the hardest work was still ahead. Inside the palace, Traoré met again with his Citizens' Oversight Committee. The room was bright, with windows looking out over the city. Men and women from villages, towns, and professional backgrounds sat around a long table. A teacher from the north, a nurse from the south, a miner, and a market trader all took turns. Reviewing financial reports, they asked straightforward questions. How much gold had been sold? Where did the money go? What projects were funded this month? Traoré answered each question honestly. When someone asked about the new clinic in Bobo Dioulasso, he explained how refinery proceeds paid for beds, medicines, and trained staff. The committee nodded, and their approval reassured many citizens that the system had real checks and balances. Outside the palace doors, critics still voiced concerns. Some worried that concentrating so much power in the hands of a few would lead to corruption. They spoke of a gold guard, an elite military unit tasked with protecting the refinery and its shipments. They questioned whether this guard might one day serve private interests. Traoré understood these worries. At a public forum held in a town hall, he faced these doubts directly, stood before a crowd of villagers and said, "Yes, we have a guard to protect our wealth. Its orders come from the Oversight Committee, not from me alone. Every soldier knows that we serve the people first." He invited the committee's head to speak, and the head explained the guard's rules: no use of force except to prevent theft, monthly reports to the committee, and open doors for any visitor to inspect barracks and equipment in foreign capitals. Analysts followed these developments closely. Some Western governments softened their stance after seeing Burkina Faso's commitment to transparency. A diplomatic cable from London noted optimism. If this model holds, resource nationalism can coexist with market stability. Paris sent a delegation to learn from the Oversight Committee's structure, and the European Union offered technical assistance in financial auditing. Rather than imposing sanctions, they now offered support. Traoré had shifted their view simply. By inviting cooperation and proving his promises, back home, the refinery entered its next phase: expansion. Engineers arrived with new plans to add more furnaces and storage rooms. Traoré visited the site early one morning, finding rows of steel beams ready to be lifted. He walked through half-built corridors, imagining the roar of new machines and the hum of activity. Workers greeted him with smiles. A foreman pointed out the design for a new training center where apprentices could learn metallurgy and industrial maintenance. Traoré placed a hand on the foreman's shoulder and said, "This will be your school as well as your job. Teach them well." In the capital's university, students formed new programs in mining, engineering, and accounting. Scholarships funded by refinery profits encouraged young men and women to study fields directly related to the project. On graduation day, a group of newly minted engineers paraded in caps and gowns. They carried flags of Burkina Faso and banners reading "Build Our Future." Traoré attended the ceremony and gave a simple speech. "You are the architects of our tomorrow. Use your skills to serve every region, every person, and every dream." Meanwhile, rural villages far from the refinery began to feel its ripple effects. A dirt road linking a mining town to the main highway had once been dangerous and potholed. Now the government used refinery funds to pave it, cutting travel time in half. Farmers could bring their produce to market more easily. The price of goods fell slightly because transport costs dropped. In another region, a small dam built with refinery money provided irrigation to fields that had long dried up during the dry season. Women farmers who once watched their harvests fail now grew vegetables year-round. They sold extra in market stalls for extra income. A woman named Zainab, who had sold millet for cash before, told her neighbors, "This water changed our lives. We can feed our children and still have grain to sell." Not all reactions were positive. Some remote villages still felt the distance from the center of power. A village elder in the far west complained at a radio call-in show, "The refinery may help Ouagadougou and nearby towns, but here we still wait for roads and clinics." Traoré heard these messages and traveled to that very region. He held a town meeting under an acacia tree, surrounded by dusty fields. Percentage of refinery taxes would go directly to underserved areas. He laid out a plan for mobile clinics and road crews. The villagers cheered, and children danced in new school uniforms sent by the government. Meanwhile, gold shipments continued under tight security. Convoys rolled out at dawn, escorted by the Gold Guard and monitored by drone cameras. Each shipment drew international notice because of its purity and volume. Price charts showed steady supply without wild swings. Traders now planned their purchases a month ahead, trusting the refinery's schedule. The smoothing of market fluctuations itself became a sign of Burkina Faso's growing influence in global trade. Inside the refinery, women took on leadership roles. Amina, who began as a quality inspector, now managed the lab staff. She wore a clean white coat and oversaw tests on each gold batch, ensuring it met international standards. She trained other women technicians, creating a pathway for more female participation. Outside her office, a notice board listed training sessions, continuing education courses, and open invitations to local schools. Young women from the city and villages signed up eagerly. As harvest season ended, Traoré visited a wine festival in the hills north of the city. He sampled honey wine made by villagers who had never expected to show their crafts at a national fair. They offered him a wooden cup, and he drank with delight. He told them how refinery revenues would fund agricultural grants and help preserve traditional crafts. The winemakers cheered. They felt seen at last. At the refinery's annual anniversary, Traoré returned to the stage. A year had passed since the ribbon-cut ceremony. He looked out at a sea of faces: workers, investors, villagers, diplomats, students, and family members. He spoke of the road traveled, from a dream in a dusty office to a powerhouse of progress. He thanked every hand that had played a part. Then he turned philosophical. "We have proved that we can stand on our own," he said. "But our work is endless. Self-reliance is not an end. It is a daily choice." His words rang clear as the crisp morning air. After the ceremony, Traoré walked alone through the refinery courtyard. The sun glinted off metal catwalks and polished floors. He felt a deep sense of pride mixed with humility. He thought of the day he stood before the disused textile mill, seeing promise in broken walls. He thought of the families who now sent their children to better schools, and the miners who now held fair wages in their hands. He remembered the critics who warned of failure, and he knew they had been proven wrong. Yet he also felt the weight of responsibility. Western capitals continued to watch, ready to question each move. Markets depended on stability, and any misstep could send shockwaves across borders. He would have to guard against complacency, listen to critics, and ensure that transparency never faltered. He would have to maintain the guard's integrity, protect the committee's independence, and keep the people's trust. That evening, as he returned to the palace, he found a letter from a schoolteacher in a remote province. She wrote of how her students now studied maps of the refinery and dreamed of working there one day. She thanked him for giving them hope beyond the horizon. Traoré read her words again and felt a quiet warmth in his chest. He folded the letter carefully, pinned it to his office board, and looked out at the city lights. Burkina Faso had opened a gold refinery that rattled Western capitals and, in doing so, it had also awakened the spirit of its own people. The journey was far from over, but the path had been set. As long as leaders and citizens walked it together, each step would bring them closer to the future they all envisioned. A land where wealth served the many, not the few. Where dreams found solid ground and where a single refinery stood as a symbol of what a nation could achieve when it dared to believe in itself.